Hi there and welcome to a video from me, the History Tutor, and this video is going to be looking at the Germany topic 1890 to 1945 AQA. I'm going to be looking at skills around life in Germany under the Nazis. So in this tutoring lesson, I'm going to be talking you through the in what ways question for the AQA Paper One exam. We're going to be looking at youth in particular and thinking about in what ways was their life affected by the Nazis. Do have a revision of your youth and society work. You might want to consider women as well as part of that family unit. And then once you've revised, you can look at my revision videos, you can look at my revision guide. Once you revise, come back, we'll have a short quiz, and then we'll talk through the question in detail and how to produce an excellent answer. So now let's go to a quiz. All right, so here's a quick quiz. 6 questions on life in Arts Germany, particularly about youth and women and family life. So have a look through these questions. Use them as a guide to help you look through my revision guide pages and also my YouTube videos and my talk throughs. You'll find them on Arts Germany playlists. Okay, so pause me now and give it a go. All right, so we've got some answers. So here are the answers I've got. So what was the name of the youth group for girls aged 14 to 18? So it's League of German Maidens. And obviously for women, really important to go to youth groups to think about how to be great mothers, how to be aware of the race laws, to be bringing up your children as great Nazis, but also they learnt about rationing and learnt about cooking and sewing. Also learnt about the Nazis, so they were brainwashed about being great Nazi mothers. So what about the boys? List 2 activities Hitler Youth boys would do to prepare to be soldiers. So one of the key things about Hitler Youth boys was they're preparing for war. So they would do military marches, camps, teamwork exercises like raft building or rifle skills, or they would look at bravery exercises. Okay, question 3. In school, what did history teach people? Well, it taught children about the history of the Nazis, glorious battles in the past, and great history of the racial groups like the Aryans, etc. So being taught to be loving your country, nationalistic, loving the Nazis, being aware of the Treaty of Versailles and why it was good to fight back against these things. History could be a great one for indoctrinating. In school, how could maths indoctrinate? Be aware of a nice example like teaching bombing angles, or you might have seen in your textbooks the euthanasia example about if you closed the disabled hospitals, how much money would be saved, and how could that money be used more efficiently with things like marriage loans. So why are women important in Nazi Germany? Well, the population had fallen after World War I, and we needed to have lots of babies to bring up the number of soldiers potentially for the country. So a great power nation needed a big population and lots of soldiers. Also, they would bring up their children to be Nazis. They would send them to school, they would send them to youth groups, they would ensure traditional German values. Question number 6. How were women encouraged to leave work and get married? Well, they had 1,000 Reichsmark marriage loan given to them, and this would be repaid if they had lots and lots of children. Also, they'd get medals for having lots of children, as I'm sure you know is one of your best examples you could talk about. Right, so we're going to look at this question. In what ways did the Nazi policies affect the life of children in the years 1933 to 39? We always have a look in my videos when we're tutoring at a success criteria. How would we produce a successful answer? So what I'd like to do now is stop and take a think for a moment and look at the words in the question. What sort of skills do you think you need to do to produce a good answer? And make a note of those skills in your revision guide, and so that you can be aware of how to be successful in the in what ways question. Okay, so pause me now and give it a go. Okay, so we've got some ideas. So here are my ideas. So firstly, it's 8 marks. So you need to make sure you explain 2 ways in your P or paragraphs. So we need to think about, in this case, 2 ways that life of children was affected by the Nazis. So we need to have 2 arguments in our points. So each paragraph opens with a nice point to argue. When we've got our point, we need some evidence and examples to back that up. So we need like a Nazi policy, perhaps, or an educational change or a youth group change. And then finally, we need to explain. We need to explain lots of ways this affected children, made them militaristic, warlike, etc. Having a good think about those ideas. So hopefully it'll be a nice, simple, standard point, evidence, explain answer we can develop in this lesson. So what's it going to look like? As I said, we're going to do point, evidence, explain, link. So we're going to repeat the question back and create our argument. One way the Nazis affected the life of children is that they did this. For example, they introduced this policy. This affected the lives of children as, and we give some consequence explanation knowledge. Now, if we want to get to 7 or 8 marks, we need to explain a wider link. We need to be showing some analytical skills. So we say, furthermore, this affected them because. So we might therefore think about that example we've given and think, can we think a bit more widely? How else did it affect children? And we do that paragraph twice. So let's do some planning now. Okay, so what can you think of in terms of laws the Nazis brought in? Can you think of some explanations and impacts on children? So pause me now and look through revision guide. Look through my revision notes and videos. Can you find some ideas now? Okay, where you go. Right, so here's my ideas then. So I've gone with the example of Nazi school curriculum first of all. Non-Nazi teachers were sacked. History lessons about Hitler and the Nazis. Maths could indoctrinate people. There were biology with race science. You could pick any of those range of examples. So this had the impact of children were committed Nazis. They were indoctrinated into wanting to conquer land. They had Nazi values. So quite a simple idea in some respects. Then, of course, second paragraph, you can do youth groups. So you could have more specific military activities, marches, shooting, bravery tests. You could talk about school curriculum and boxing. The impact here is children became, in this case, more militaristic. Not our first explanation was they were more committed Nazis and had their values and maybe their race laws, etc. Now they're militaristic. They want to fight wars. They want to destroy the Treaty of Versailles and get Lebensraum. Girls are being helped with this, with rationing, total war, those type of ideas. So we can probably explain two clear different ideas. One about Nazi values, one about militarism. So let's start giving this a go, shall we? Here's our opening sentence. So one way the Nazis affected the life of children is that. Have a look back at our plan, pause me now, and in your revision guide or on your paper, write your first sentence, and then I'll show you an example answer. Where you go. Okay, so here's my example. I've said one way the Nazis affected life of children is that they changed their school curriculum to indoctrinate them to be Nazis. So I've gone with the first plan to be committed Nazis. All right, so let's give an example now. Pick something out of their school curriculum that is indoctrinating them to have Nazi values. Maybe pick one or two subjects and a bit of detail. Pause now and go. Right, so here's what I've gone for. So I've said, for example, children had their lessons changed and non-Nazi teachers were sacked so they could be taught to believe Nazi race science and to believe Nazi policies. So if I wanted a little bit more detail, I could say that German lessons had like Mein Kampf and Hitler speeches. I could give a bit more detail. Biology became race science. But I think I've got enough there. So now we want to explain. This affected the lives of children because, and explain an impact. Okay, so pause me now and think about an impact you want to add in. Okay, so I've said this affected the lives of children as in their biology lessons, children were taught to think Aryans were the greatest race and to hate the Jews. This meant that as adults they would be expected to select an Aryan partner and have racially pure children. So race science starts to have an impact. Okay, can you think of a furthermore now? Maybe we could now think about another value they've learned. Or maybe it's talking about boys and girls differences in their curriculum perhaps. Have a think. Pause me now and give it a go. So I've said, furthermore, they were taught to love Hitler. In German and history lessons, they would learn about the history of the Nazis and read Hitler's speeches. This meant they would become committed Nazis and devoted their lives to Nazis and obviously to Hitler. So now, look back at our plan. I'd like you to write our second paragraph. I'm not going to talk you through piece by piece. Go for it yourself now, thinking about militarism and those youth groups. Remember, boys were taught one area of militarism. Girls are taught to be ready for total war with rationing, so you could do your furthermore about girls. Pause me now, give it a go, and then we'll look at an example. Okay, so here's mine. Now assess your answer looking at this one. So I've said as my opening point, another way the Nazis affect the life of children is by indoctrinating young people to be more militaristic and support war via youth groups. I've then talked about some youth group evidence. For example, Hitler Youth boys wore military uniform, took part in marches, would learn military sabotage techniques. Then explain the impact this affected their lives as they became more militaristic and committed to war for Germany. They'd be happy to fight in a war to take back land lost at the Treaty of Versailles and to rebuild the greatness of Germany. So girls then I've gone for as my wider link. Furthermore, in the League of German Maidens, girls learned to cook, sew and look after materials. This meant girls' lives changed. They were taught to manage total war. They could cook with rationing, could repair and reuse damaged clothes, recycle and reuse other materials to support the war effort. Now have a think about some of these other ideas. So we've just looked at youth. This is quite a nice question for the examiners to give you to think about an area of life. So you could talk about in what ways do Nazi policies affect life of workers, women, Christians. They're all really good questions they could ask you. Obviously, they've limited to 933 to 39 there. They could change the dates even to 45. It could be about in what ways did the Second World War affect the life of Germans, 39 to 45. So you could have one of those questions. So have a look through all of those different topics, see what you can come up with as some ideas. Okay, so if you found this video useful, then do have a look at my YouTube channels in more detail, and obviously do have a look at my revision guides as well. I have lots and lots of revision guides to look at. Okay, but otherwise, I hope to see you again soon. Do subscribe, and bye-bye for now.